Good evening. We're ready to get started. Actually, we're a minute late. My apologies. I didn't see the clock. Michael, where's my reminder? You're always my reminder guy. I'm just waiting for you to remind me that I'm late. Okay. Tonight we're going to be learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Ayin Dalet, and as well in Yirtzeh Hashem Daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. We'll probably be using most of our time. So let's get started. We are 2 lines from the bottom, Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. And Gufa, we're always, whenever we see the word Gufa, of course, we know we're re-quoting from something that we just learned. And yesterday, we made a brief reference to this discussion about whether or not we say Mavui is Nitar B'Lechi V'Koreh, under what circumstances do we allow a Mavui to have a Lechi and a Koreh. And here we have a big machlokes in the Amoraim, Gufa. Amar Rav said, Ein Mavui Nitar B'Lechi V'Koreh. We do not allow for a Mavui to become mutter to carry in, unless, ad, sheyihu Batim v'chatzeros psuchem l'socha. We need the houses open to the chatzeros and the chatzeros open to the mavui. We need a classical structure. I remember in the beginning of Eruvin, I drew this classical picture of the kind of like the upside down U shape, the outermost to the bottom, and then the chatzer, and then the mavui. Rav wants a classical case where people actually live, and without that, you're not allowed to have a lechi and a kor to be matir in the case of a mavui. Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph, second line, Ushmuel Amar, a little different. Afilu bayis echad v'chatzer achas, even if it's only one house in one chatzer, which seems, what do you need a heter for the mavui? Like, okay, we have to see exactly what, and how is that different than the first shita? We'll see soon that Shmuel's shita is not so pashut. And the third shita of Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu churba, even in a place that's a place where nobody lives, it's a rundown house, it's a vacant house. You ever drive through neighborhoods and you see the plyboard like all over the windows? It's one of those houses that nobody lives in. It's livable in theory. Yes, it's true, but nobody lives there. Now, these are the 3 shitas of how and where, I should say, we allow for a lechi and or koreh to be placed in a mavui, to be matir carrying in a mavui. So the Gemara is going to ask one particular set of questions here against Rabbi Yochanan. Amar le Abai le Rabbi Yosef. Amar Rabbi Yochanan afilu b'shvil shel kramim. How far does Rav Yochanan go? Rav Yochanan says in a churba, which is a place that in theory is a house, just a rundown house. Would he also say it in a field, like a vineyard field? Like, ad heichan, how far does it go that he's matir such a thing? And to answer that question, the Gemara says, Amar le, no. Lo Amar Rav Yochanan ela b'churba dechazi l'dira. Aval shvil shel kramim de lo chazi l'dira lo. No. The only time Rav Yochanan says that you're allowed to make a mavui with a lechi or a koreh is in a place that has at least living quarters. But a vineyard doesn't have living quarters. If it doesn't have living quarters, then Rav Yochanan will not allow it. So these are the 3 shitas, and the Gemara just explained Rav Yochanan. And in fact, the Gemara is going to now support Rav Yochanan. Amar Rav Huna, 5-6 lines down. Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Huna bar chinana ve'az Rav Yochanan l'taimei. And here we're going to go into a slightly different area of halacha and then bring it back to where we are. Let's not forget where we're starting, that we allow, says Rabbi Yochanan, to build a lechi or koreh when the living quarters are even a churba, namely that nobody lives in them, but they are at least in theory a makom dira. So where is the precedent for this within Rabbi Yochanan? Where is the other shita that links to this? Says the Gemara, it's in a Mishnah. It's not. Amar Reb Shimon, echad gagos ve'echad karfifos ve'echad chatzeros. The roofs and these fields that really nobody really lives in, and these chatzeros, you're allowed to carry on all of the roofs of, let's say, for example, the old city. But however, the utensils that are in your house, those you can't bring out to other chatzeros. That's not allowed. So says the Gemara, and on that we said, Rav said halacha ki Reb Shimon. And what were the parameters where we said you can carry on the roof? That's only where you didn't otherwise make an eruv to carry on the roofs. Why does that make sense? Aval irvu, but had you made an eruv, then we would have had a concern. What was the concern? We're afraid that had you made an eruv to carry on the roofs, that maybe then you'd make the accident of taking items out of your house and bringing them from your chutzner into another chutzner. It's not very clear from the Gemara that that's what it's talking about, but that's how the Rishonim, that's how Rashi understands, that we're talking about a gzeira of if you made an eruv to carry on the roofs, so then that's mutter. But the problem is that if that's the case, then we're going to add a stringency, because we're concerned that you may take a kli from your house into your chutzner and then into your neighbor's chutzner. And that is the shita of Rav. Ushmuel Amar Bein irvu uvein lo irvu. Shmuel shows that he's not concerned about this, and either way, one is allowed to carry on the roofs. V'chein amar Rav Yochanan as well feels the same way that Shmuel does, and says halacha k'Reb Shimon bein irvu uvein shelo irvu. He holds like Reb Shimon that it's mutter to carry whether or not there's an eruv. Now remember that we started with Rav Yochanan, and now we're gonna finish our support of Rav Yochanan with his own statement. Alma, what do we see from here, from this case of carrying on the roofs? Alma, the fact that he doesn't distinguish between irvu and lo irvu, the fact that he agrees wholeheartedly with Shmuel means what? So here's what he says. Alma, says the Gemara, halfway down ayin dalet amud aleph. Alma lo gazrinan dilma asi la'afuke manei debatim l'chatzer. We were not concerned about taking something from one space out into another, from one person's house into their chatzer and then into their neighbor's chatzer. We're not concerned about that. Hachanami, 2/3 of the way down. Here too, in our case of the churban, of the churva, lo gazrinan dilma asi la'afuke manei dechatzer l'churva. We're not concerned that you'll carry something out of into a churva. So therefore, says Rav Yochanan, we're therefore allowed to be lenient to allow for the mavui of that space to be nitar v'lechi v'kora. We're not concerned anymore. So now we have two cases of Rav Yochanan that are similar. This is the proof, right? I have in my Gemara Q, A, and P. Question, answer, and proof. This is the proof to Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan is that he is not concerned about churva that it would lead us to a rabbinic injunction of bringing out of your house into this space that you're not allowed to bring it into. We have two cases of it, and therefore Rav Yochanan's shita is then supported. 8 lines from the bottom of the page, 9 lines. Yasiv Rav Barona v'ka'amar lahashmaisa. Rav Barona was talking about this sugya. Amar le Rabbi Elazar bar Bei Rav. Amar bar Bei Rav. Amar Shmuel hachi. Did in fact Shmuel actually say this? That what? That we're not concerned about irvu or lo irvu in the case of carrying on the roofs. Amar le'in. That is correct. That's what he said. But Rav Barona wasn't here. It wasn't going to have it. He said, Amar le achvele ushbize. What hotel is he staying in? You tell me where he's staying. I want to go hear this directly from his mouth. Tell me where it's achvele. He showed him. Asa lakami de Shmuel. And Rav Barona went right up to Shmuel and said, tell me, Amar le, Amar mar hachi. Did you really hold this way? Were you really of the opinion that bein irvu, bein shelo irvu, that we would say that, what was the case here again, about that you can carry on top of all the roofs? So he says, absolutely, Amar le'in, yes. So Baruna asks him a question from his own Mari Makom. V'hamar hu da'amar. You, Shmuel, you yourself said something that totally conflicts with what you just said. What is it that you said? Amar le be'eruvin. Ein lanu to Amar, Ein lanu be'eruvin ela kalashon mishnasenu. We always have to follow the basic language of our Mishnah. And what does the Mishnah say? Shehamavui lechatzeros kechatzer lebatim. That a mavui is to treat it like a chatzer as a chatzer is to the houses. Now the word chatzeros, Rashi points out, is plural. Take a look at Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. Shehamavui lechatzeros daikinan. We infer from here the lishna de chatzeros velo chatzer. It's plural. And if you look back in the Mishnah that was quoted at the top of this page, what does it say? It says echad gagos ve'echad karfifos ve'echad chatzeros. And you were matir, Shmuel, in that case of chatzeros. How can you be matir in that case of chatzeros? You yourself said that doesn't work. It's a contradiction in terms. So then the Gemara says, ishtik. Shmuel was totally silent. So then now the Gemara wants to know, shtika kehoda or not. When a person is silent, does it mean something or does it mean nothing? The Gemara is not sure. So asks the Gemara, kiblamine o lo kiblamine. Was Shmuel willing to accept this rebuke from the Talmud or no? Was Shmuel willing to say that I made an error in judgment or no? So says the Gemara, let's see, Toshma, Tehahu Mavoa, there was a Mavui, Tehabadayer Bey, Evus Bar Ihi, this is a person's name, Evus Bar Ihi lived in this particular Mavui, Avad Le Lechaya, he made a lechi for it, Vishar Le Shmuel. And this was the opening of our Gemara, that he was matir with a lechi or a koreh with even only one house. That's Shmuel Shita from the top of this page. So that we see here, seemingly that Shmuel still agrees with his initial opinion, implying that he doesn't agree with the rejection of Rav Barona. So it says the Gemara as follows. Turning to the top of Ayin Dal and Amud Beis. Asa Rav Anan, and Rashi here points out, Asa Rav Anan la'achar mos Shmuel. So you just always pay attention to the history. When Rav Anan was Rav, Shmuel was dead already. He had passed away. So Rav Anan, after he waited respectfully until Shmuel passed away. But once Shmuel passed away, then Shadye, he took down, says Rashi, Shadye, second Rashi on the page, Dibra Maskal, Shadye, he peel halechi. He's like, no dice, this is not working. So then Evus Bar Ihi, who was living there, said, Omar, he says to Rav Anan, I don't understand. Mavoa de Dayarna Bay, this Mavoi in which I live in, Ve'astina Mishmei Demar Shmuel. Who's bigger than Shmuel to be matir this Mavoi with a lechi? Who are you, Rav Anan, to take it down? Nese Rav Anan Barav, Nishtei Aman, you're going to be the one to take it down. You're not Shmuel. You're the next generation of Amoraim. You're a big Talmid Chacham, but you're no Shmuel. So not in a mean way. So Shmami, no, what do we see from this story? Lo kibla mineh. It seems that Shmuel was still holding of his initial opinion that this lechi would still work, even though there may well be multiple chatzeros. So says the Gemara, Le'olam, really, I would tell you, Ein malach kibla mineh. Really what's going on here is that Shmuel did, in fact, accept the Musar from Rav Bruna, and Shmuel's Shita was one that was incorrect. The Evus Bar Ihi Savar, Evus Bar Ihi was of the opinion that Shmuel held Makom Pita Garim, but really Shmuel Ataime de Amar Makom Lina Garim. And really this wasn't about anything else. It was about the old sugya that we learned about yesterday. The sugya of whether or not we look at the Lina or we look at the Pita. Do we look at the eating places or the sleeping places? So really this whole conversation had a different subtext than the one that we thought. We thought that it was all about whether or not Shmuel was going to be choser bo, was he makabel the musar for a barona? And the answer is that that's not what they were talking about at all. They were talking about whether or not they would say makom pita garim or makom lina garim. That brings us to the two dots, ayin daled amud beis, halfway down. And we're going to be learning now the next sugya, and this will take us to another Mishnah, and then we'll get to Amir Hashem, the bottom of ayin hey amud aleph. Says the Gemara as follows: Amar Rab Yehuda, Amar Rab. Yehuda Rav teaches us a statement, a memra. Mavui shetzido echad ove kochavim. If you're in a mavui where one side has an akum, vitzido echad Yisrael, and on the other side is a Yisrael. So the din is ein me'arveno so derech chalonos la'atiro derech psachim mavui. You cannot be ma'ariv through windows. So here we really need to look at Rashi and the picture that Rashi draws. So let's take a look at Rashi here. Rashi says, Tzido dibra maskal, Tzido echad nachri. It's about 12 lines down or so in Rashi. Tzido echad nachri v'tzido echad Yisrael umavui beinehem. So you have Jews living on one side, a non-Jew living on the other, and there's a mavui that is centered between them. And that mavui, of course, in some way should lead to a rishus harabim, potentially. And then says the next Rashi. Rashi says, "Dibur hamaschel ein ma'arveno so derech chalonos lahatir derech psachim mamavi." What's going on here? And here is the explanation. To the one side, where all of the Jews are living on the right side of this mavui. Im yesh bate Yisrael eitzel beso shel Yisrael ze psuchos l'rishus harabim. You have a bunch of houses that all open into a rishus harabim, but below the mavui, they don't directly below the mavui the chalonos beinim. They don't open directly to the mavui. And there are windows from house to house. So let's say, I don't know, do you have a picture in your Gemaras? Yeah. Okay. Because I don't know if the Oz V'Hadar, I know some of you are using it. I don't know if the other Gemaras, Art Scroll, yeah, for sure has it. So if you look at the picture there, you'll see that the Yisrael houses, some of them have windows one to the next. And the question in our Gemara is whether or not you can be ma'ariv through the windows. So says the Gemara, back inside, Ein ma'arvenos lo derech chalonos la'atir derech psachim mamav. You cannot do that. Which means that the people in the innermost houses of the Yisraels are not allowed to use the chalon as a way to make an eruv to then carry into the mavui. So Amar Leah Bailer of Yosef, Amar Rab Afilu b'chatzer. Would he say the same thing if you look at the picture where there's a mavui and replaced it with a chatzer? Would he say the same thing? Let me ask the question in slightly different terms. How does this work from the world of shituf muvos into the world of eruv chatzerus? Do we apply the same rules of no chalon? You can no chalon eruvin by shituf muvos as well as by chatzer. So answers the Gemara, Amar le'in, and asks the Gemara. So the Gemara says yes. In fact, the halacha is the same way, that we would not allow it. Di'ilo Amar mai. What if he would not have said that by a chatzer? Then what would have been the din by Rab? Sahava mina time of the Rab. I might have thought that maybe the reason why Rab held only by a mavui and not by a chatzer, had it been that it wasn't that way, was the Rav mishum de kasavar ein mavui nitar belachi v'kol re'achu batim v'chatzeres psuchim lasocho. We might have thought that the reason why Rav would have not said this case by chatzer and only said this case by mavui. Let me say this a little more clearly. We might have thought that the reason why Rav did not allow for eruv through windows in the case of mavui, and maybe he would not have allowed it in a chatzar, is because of the din of mavui that we started with, that when it comes to a mavui, we have a din. All the houses have to be directly open to the mavui. And here that's not the case. So then says the Gemara, but if that were to have been true, v'tarte lamali, if what you're saying is that this statement is really the statement that we started with on the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, that Rav only allows a lechi or korah when it's open directly to the mavui, why bother having two of the same statements? They're effectively identical, right? It has to be that Rav was of the opinion that a chatzer also would be equally forbidden here to make an eruv through the windows in the case of a chatzer as well as by mavui. Because what was your havamina otherwise? It says the Gemara, tzricha, no, even if Rav would not have allowed an eruv through the windows in a case of mavui and would have allowed it in a chatzer, there still is a chiddush between this case that we just learned here at the two dots and the case that we started with on the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis of Ein Mavui Nitar Belechi V'Koreh. So basically what we're doing is comparing two statements of Rav and asking, why do we need both of them? And answers the Gemara as follows. Bottom line of Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, Tzricha. We need both statements. Te'imei hahi, if I only had the line that we started with of Ein Mavui Nitar Belechi V'Koreh, that the only time that you can use a lechi or kor in a mavui is if the homes are open straight into the mavui. If I only had that source of Rav, then Hava Amina, I might have thought, turning to the top of Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, Hava Amina, I might have thought Diras Ove Kochavim Shmadira, because the second statement deals with an akum. And without that second statement, I might have assumed erroneously that because just by omission, that maybe I would have assumed that diras akum is shma dira. And that's not true. Kamash Malan comes the second statement, the one right here in the middle of Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, the one that specifically paints a case where a Jew and an akum are sharing a mavui. Comes the Gemara to teach us two statements of Rav, and the second one teaches us that Kamash Malan, the diras akum, diras ove kochavim, lo shma dira. Very good. So now we understand why we needed both statements of Rav, why we need the second statement of Rav about the mavui that's shared by Yisrael and an akum. And if we would have only had this line where the Yisrael and the akum share a mavui, and if we didn't have our opening line on Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, which spoke about Ein Mavui Nitar Belechi V'Koreh until they're open directly to a mavui, if I only had the second case, Hava Mina Lo Yadana Batim Kama, because our case was dealing with only one house here, and I wouldn't have known how the rules applied if there was more than one mavui. We wouldn't have known, because our case says that there was one Jew and one non-Jew. Kamash Malan Batim Train, that it can even be multiple homes. Good. So now we've answered our question. So asks the Gemara, Hashta da'amar Rav afilu chatzer. But now that Rav in fact does say that the same rule applies, that we limit an eruv through windows, both where the space between the Jew and the non-Jew is either a mavui or a chatzer. So then, taima de Rav, what's the deeper reason of Rav? What do we see from here? To kasavar, he must hold asar lasos yachid b'makom oved kochavim. It is not allowed for there to be one person to live with one akum. And we've seen a number of Gemaras that reflects this idea already about possible shvichus damim and those kinds of concerns as well. We focused on them many blot ago. Amar of Yosef, Ihachi, thank you very much. If what you're saying is true, you taught me something. Hainu de shamana le Rabbi Tavla, de Amar, Obed Kochavim Trezimnev, Lo Yadana, my Amar. Why did my Rabbi Reb Tavla say the same thing twice about Akum? I didn't know what he was talking about. Now I know what he's talking about, to teach me the Chiddush that you cannot live alone in a Chatzer or a Mavui, just one Jew and one Akum. Okay, that brings us to the next Mishnah on Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, about 10 lines down. This Mishnah we've spoken about many times, and I'll just review quickly outside, and then we'll go inside, is that we're talking about in this Mishnah where you have two chatzeros. They're both open to one another, but the deeper one is basically in the end of a cul-de-sac. And the only way to get to the inner chatzer is through the outer chatzer. And what we're going to be focusing on today is what happens if I walk into your property with or without an eruv? Do I ruin your eruv? Can we carry to one another, and so forth and so on? So again, the inner eruv, the pnimius, as it's referred to, the inner eruv only has one entryway, and it's through the outer eruv. It's through the outer chatzer. So let's get started in the Mishnah. Shtei chatzeros zolif nimizo. You have two chatzeros, one deep and one less deep. The deeper one only has one access point, which is through the outer one. Ir v'hapnimis, if the inner one made an eruv within itself, Velo irva hachitzona, and the outer one did not make an eruv. So then the din is hapnimis muteres v'achitzona asura. The din is that the inner chatzer, it's mutter for everyone to carry, and they made an eruv, no problem. And the outer one v'achitzona asura. Now pashut, right? No, because maybe what? He has to, the team still has to walk. But he's fine. But meaning why is he fine though? Because they made an eruv in the pneumius one. The people who live in the pneum on the inner one, they only have one entry point and an exit point, and that's through the outer chatzer. So if the pneumius one makes an eruv, they're self-contained. In other words, even though he's passing through, that's fine. What's more concerning is if the person from the chitzonius comes into the pneum, then they ruin the eruv. But if they're bubbled, basically, if the inner chatzer makes an eruv among themselves, all the homes, all the bottom, whatever the construction is there, we don't care. If they make an eruv with the pneumius, you're fine. They can carry. But the people in the chitzonius obviously can't carry. They didn't make an eruv. They're all going to asr on each other. But the inner eruv can function on its own. But now let's reverse it. Let's see. Hachitzona, we're 3 lines before the wide lines. Hachitzona, let's say that the outer one made an eruv, velo hapnimis, then shtehen asuros. This is the reverse. So the inner one did not make an eruv, but the outer one made an eruv. Why is the outer eruv bad? Because the only way the people from the pneumius are going to get out is through the chitzona. And that means that they're going to ruin with what's called drisas haregel. The people who live in the inner one what are they going to do? The only way to get out is through the chitzona. So they ruin their eruv. So even though they made an eruv, but when the guy for the pneumius wants to go to Shachris in another place and it's all within his tchum, he ruins their whole eruv. So whereas when the eruv was made in the inner chatzer and not in the outer, the inner one maintains their eruv and the outer one doesn't. But if the outer chatzer made an eruv and the inner one did not, neither of them work because of the drisas regel of the people who live on the inner eruv, who would then walk into the chitzonis and ruin their eruv. Perfect as it may have been, it doesn't work. Make sense? Okay, so then says the Gemara Mishnah as follows. Irvazu le'atzma v'zu le'atzma. Let's say that each of them, both of them, make their own Eruvin. So then says the Mishnah, Zumu teres bifnei atzma v'zumu teres bifnei atzma. Everybody stay put, and then you're fine. But then you can, that was not our case. First, we learned that there was only an Eruvin.
You're not going to be liable on anything.
Well, within any one chatzer, there may be 50 houses. So you have to make Eruvin chatzeres to carry. Not about liable. This is all dinei derabanan. We're not talking about carrying as it relates to eruv tchumen or anything like that. Right now, we're only talking about eruv chatzer. The din derabanan to carry in your chatzer. Are you allowed to carry? Yes or no? So that's what we're talking about here. So in the pneumius, and in this case, it's both of them. They both make an eruv. So the din is last short line. Zomu teres bifnei atzma v'zomu teres bifnei atzma. Now Rabbi Akiva argues. Rabbi Akiva oser hachitzona. Why does Rabbi Akiva say that the outer one is bad? Because what's going to happen? Shedrisas haregel osarta. Because still, even if it's true that each of them made their own eruvin, but the fact is that when someone from the chatzer pnimi walks through the chatzer outside the chatzer achitzona, it's drisas haregel, and you just ruin the eruv. And therefore, the only eruv that will stand, even if both of them made eruvin, is the inner chatzer, not the other one. The Chachamim omrim no, ein drisas haregel osarta. This is going to be the focus of our Gemara today. This machlokas Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, just to highlight it with a little more clarity outside, does walking through someone's chatzer, in which that chatzer had an eruv, if you're the outsider and you walk through their chatzer, do you ruin it? Just walking through. I'm not talking about making a kfis. You're not moving in. You're walking to Shachris. Your shul's on the outside of their chatzer. You're not carrying anything. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just walking. Do you ruin their chutzner? So let's see. That's going to be our conversation today. But before that, we need to finish up a couple more cases in our Mishnah. Second of the wide lines, almost a third of the way down. Shachach echad min hachitzona v'lo irev. In a case where one person in the outer eruv forgot to be me'arev, hapnimis muteres v'achitzona asura. Seemingly not much of a chiddush, because it sounds just like the second case that we learned, where even if the outer person made an eruv, not much makes a difference because drisas haregel, according to Rabbi Akiva. So really part of our conversation today is going to be who's the author of this Mishnah, because it seems like some of these lines could go either way. What about min hapnimis? What if somebody forgot to make an eruv on the inner chatzer, Vilo Irev, one person forgot, then Shtehen Asuros. The inner one's messed up because one guy forgot to do it. Maybe he could do bittul, maybe he can't. But without that, it's a problem. And the outer chutzner is going to be usher because of Drisas Harega. Another case, Nasnu Eruvin b'makom echad. All of them put their Eruv in one place. Unclear exactly what this means. So if they all put it in one place, v'shachach echad, and one person forgot. If one person forgot, then it's going to be a big problem. So this case, l'chora, is where they both made an Eruv together. This wasn't each of them making their own Eruv. They both made an Eruv together, both places, but one person forgot. It ruins it for everybody. Last case of the Mishnah, then einon tzrichin la'arev. If it's made of individuals, what does that mean? We'll see Rashi in a moment, but when it's made of individuals, then they do not need an Eruv at all. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is about 3 or 4 inches below where we are, 2/3 of the way down. Dibur hamaschil, v'im shal yechidim, says Rashi, she'ein b'pnimis ela echad, uvechitzona echad. If there's only one person who lives in the inner chatzir, and one person who lives in the outer chatzir, says Rashi, ein tzrichin la'arev zeim zeh, Mishum Drisas Regal, you can see the rest of the Rashi, but Rashi is just giving us the case. You have one dayar, one tenant who lives in the Pnimius, and one tenant who lives in the Chitzonius. So says Rashi, based on the Mishnah here, the last 3 words of our Mishnah, Einan Tzrichen Le'arev. Very good. Says the Gemara, Ki Asa Rav Dimi. When Rav Dimi showed up on the scene from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rav Yanai, Zo Dibri Rabbi Akiva. This Mishnah is all Rabbi Akiva, minus the one line that says V'chachamim Omrim. Everything else is Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so let's see how that plays out. Says the Gemara, De Amar, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? Afilu regel hamuteres b'makoma oseres shelo b'makoma. It's mutter for the person who lives in the inner chutzner to walk in his own chutzner, but the second he walks over the threshold into the outer chutzner, he ruins it for them, says Rabbi Akiva. So he's oseres shelo b'makoma. Aval chachamim omrim, and how does Rabbi Yanai understand this? The chachamim say that kishem sheregel hamuteres eina oseres, just like walking in your own place doesn't cause for a problem. Walking is not such a massive task. It's not such a big deal. So too, kach regel ha'asura eina oseres. So the chachamim are going to hold their line that you're not allowed to, that you cannot ruin the outer chutzner just by walking. Walking, it's not sufficient enough of a maisa. Think of it almost from like an activity perspective, right? There's a big diyun in the Rishonim based on Gemaras and Sanhedrin. Is lashon hara a maisa? You're moving your lips. So there's a diyun. Do we consider that a maisa or not? No. What's the nafkamina? Malkos. Because we know that a lav she'ein bo maisa doesn't get any malkos. If you do a lav, you do an isser in the Torah, but there's no malkos, but there's no maisa. You didn't do an action. I didn't hit you, so or whatever. That's a bad example. But if I didn't do something like eating treif, so then that if yesh bo maisa, you get malkos. If there's no malkos, if there's no maisa, then there's no malkos. So is lashon hara. Is lashon hara considered to be a maisa? Discussion based on various gemaras. How do we define a maisa? The maisa is done through dibur, but be'etzem, the harm, the halachic crime of what you're doing is the speech. Okay, so similarly, we could ask the question here: is walking considered enough to be the problem? Rabbi Akiva says yes. The chachamim say no. So now the Gemara is going to ask a question. We're almost halfway down, about 8 lines into the wide lines, 7 lines into the wide lines. The Gemara asks a question. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, Ir v'chitzona v'lo pnimis shtehen asuros. In our Mishnah, we learned that if they made an Eruv in the outer chatzir and not in the inner chatzir, that both of them would be asur. Money. Whose opinion is that? Ilema Rabbi Akiva. If you're going to tell me that it's Rabbi Akiva, then my irya regel asura. It has nothing to do with regel asura. Why would you speak in such terms? It has nothing to do with that at all. Afilu regel muteres. Even had it been that there was a chatzir, an Eruv in the inner chatzir, we still would have said it's a problem. Elalav Rabbanan. So this is a question on Rav Dimi, because Rav Dimi said that our whole Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. But this line in the Mishnah seems to be like the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara, no, le'olam Rabbi Akiva. Really, this is Rabbi Akiva. How do you explain this line? It's velozu afzu. I'm not only meaning this, but I'm also meaning that. It's a construct of an answer. It's a way to solve a problem. When I say this, I don't only mean this. It's not an answer that's limited in scope. It's a sampling. But really, there are other scenarios too. It's not only when the pneumius doesn't have an eruv. It's even when the pneumius would have an eruv. So lozu afsu, it's a construct of an answer. And that's how we get out of question number 1. Next question, Tanan, just halfway down. First word on the line, at least in my pagination. I don't know what you guys have there. Tanan says the Mishnah, again, another case. This was a later case in our Mishnah. Irva zo la'atzma v'zo la'atzma. We said if the chitzona made its own eruv and the pnimius made its own eruv, we said zo muteres bifnei atzma v'zo muteres bifnei atzma. Now, Taima, what is the reason why it is that both of these eruvin work? Because the irva, because you made an eruv. Hello irva, but if you would not have made an eruv, then what would the din be? Shtehen asuros. Then they both would have been forbidden, like the earlier cases as we see in our Mishnah. V'ha money. Whose opinion would that be? To say that had you not made an eruv, they would be aser. Ilema Rabbi Akiva he afilu regel hamuteres nami. Even had it been that there was an eruv, we still would have said that it would have been problematic. Even regel hamati, or even the mutter walking, we don't allow for it. So it doesn't seem to make sense that it would be him. It must be that this is like the Rabbanan. And again, Rav Yanai, how can you say that our Mishnah is all Rabbi Akiva? This is now the second example where we see that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Akiva. Elalav Rabbanan he. And ve'od, and furthermore, the Seifa Rabbi Akiva, because the end is Rabbi Akiva. Reisha Lav Rabbi Akiva, the beginning is not him. So you got to figure it out. It sounds too much like there's a Rabbanan going on here. So then answers the Gemara as follows. Really, Kula Rabbi Akiva he. Really, we're going to stick to our guns. The initial statement of the Gemara in the name of Rav Dimi, and quoting from Rav Yanai, is that it's all Rabbi Akiva, and we're going to stay that way. Kula Rabbi Akiva he. And really, there's the language is off in our Mishnah. Here's the correct language. This would be the modified version of our Mishnah. If in fact both the inner and outer chatzers each made an eruv among themselves, each separately, and then Mishnah says zomu teres bifnei atzma, zomu teres bifnei atzma, ba'medvar mamurim. When do we say that this is the case? And therefore, how can we explain that this is still like Rabbi Akiva? She'asa sadaka. We saw this language 2 or 3 times already in the Masechta. It's where you make some type of siman by the door that your entranceway is not normal. And therefore, no one should come in and no one should come out. Aval lo asa sadaka. Chitzona asur to Rabbi Akiva. Perfect. We added in a little knech into our Mishnah that makes it perfect for Rabbi Akiva, because then Rabbi Akiva is saying that the outer chutzner is going to be aser. Rabbi Akiva oseres hachitzona midnei drisas haregel haoseres, because he says that the person from the pnim who walks into the chitzon will ruin it. But when will they not do that? When there's a daka. But if they're missing the daka, if they're missing this type of smaller opening, as it were, as we saw in Rashi many blot ago, then absolutely the outer chutzner would be ruined. Their whole eruv would be ruined. No, it would be mutter. And this would be just another way to understand, a better way to understand our Mishnah, so that we can support the shita of Rav Dimi in the name of Rav Yanai, that our whole Mishnah, minus the phrase v'chachamim omrim, our whole Mishnah is a liba de Rabbi Akiva, works perfectly. But the Gemara is being tenacious. This is our third or fourth question against this approach of Rav Dimi. Masiv Rabbi bar Abaye. What's the last line of our Mishnah? What did we learn? We learned as follows: if all you have is one yid, and you have one person living in one chutzner and one living in the other, one living in the pnim, in the inner chutzner, one living in the outer, we said there's no need to be ma'arvein tzrich in the ariv. Diuk hashal rabim tzrich in the ariv. But had it been that there were a lot of people there, you'd have to make an eruv in order to carry. What's the diuk of that? The diuk of the diuk is, what's the implication? Alma, regel hamuteres b'mekoma, eina oseres, regel ha'asura oseres. It seems to be that regel hamuteres b'mekoma, eina oseres, only the regel ha'asura, that's against Rabbi Meir. So that's still another question against Rav Yanai. That's not Rav Meir. And furthermore, Masiv Ravina asks from our Mishnah as well. Shachach echad min hachitzona velo irev. If a person from the outer chutzner forgot, shachach echad min hachitzona velo irev, he forgot to make an eruv in the outer chutzner. Hapnimis muteres v'chitzona asura. What was the next case? Shachach echad min hapnimis. If a person from the inner chutzner forgot velo irev, shtehen asuros. Now, Taima, what's the reason why that it's asur? De shachach, because he forgot. Halo shachach, the implication would be shtehen mutaros, that both of them would be permissible. The implications don't work for Rabbi Akiva. Alma, what do we see? Regel hamuteres eina oseres, against Rabbi Meir, against Rabbi Akiva, and regel asuro oseres. So now this is literally our fifth question against Rav Yanai. So therefore the Gemara pivots and says, sorry, we just can no longer understand this Mishnah to be like Rabbi Akiva. It's just too complicated. It's obviously wrong. There's too many questions that you can't answer. Says the Gemara, 5-6 lines from the bottom, faster than I thought. Ela ki asa Ravin, Amar Rav Yanai, Ravin and Rav Dimi, they traveled very closely in time together, so we often see them together. So now Ravin gives another answer of Rav Yanai. No, you're right. There's really 3 different things happening in our Mishnah, 3 different shitas in our Mishnah that are going on. Gimel machlokos badavar. There's 3 separate shitas in our Mishnah. Tanakama savar. The Tanakama of our Mishnah holds regel hamuteres eina oseres, regel hoasura oseres. This Tanakama holds on his own that the regel hamuteres eina oseres, that if I'm allowed to be in my pnim chatzer, then when I walk through your chatzer, I don't ruin it. Then Rabbi Akiva savar afilu regel hamuteres oseres, even regel hamuteres, even if I'm allowed to, even if I have an Eruvin in my pnimius, if I walk through yours, I ruin it. The Rabbanon Basrai Savre, the rabbis hold, the Chachamim hold, Kishem she regel muteres eino oseres, kach regel hoasura eino oseres. And if we go back over all of the questions we just asked against Rabbi Yanai, the initial version of Rabbi Yanai in the name of Rav Dimi, we'd be able to apply all of the cases to either the Tanakama, Rabbi Akiva, or the Chachamim, and the Gemara ends Kafta Referach, that really our Mishnah is not all like Rabbi Akiva. The Tanakama is his own shita, the Rabbi Akiva is his own shita, and the Chachamim is their own shita. We'll stop here, and on Shabbos we'll do Ayin Hayam and Beis, and as well Daf Ayin Vavim Yirtzeh Hashem. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos.
4:40, you said?